Welcome back. Well, it's been a month since the election, so we've had some time to think about things and think about things we have. There's been plenty of navel gazing, hemming and hawing, all that stuff, trying to figure out exactly what went wrong. Why did things turn out the way they did? How did Trump manage to win another election in this country? I was as disturbed. Well, disturbed is the wrong word. I was surprised by this as anyone. I'm not happy with the outcome. But first thing I'll say here is I'm going to support my president and whoever he is, whatever party he comes from, whatever. I do support the president elect. I have to because he's in charge of the country I live in, and I want the country I live in to succeed. But there's been a lot of discussion about what went wrong, what caused it. In my last video, I talked about some things like, some of the culture wars that we got dragged into, or maybe dragged ourselves into. I don't know. I think there are things around the kind of candidates that have been that have been put up for the top posts for Democrats. People like Kamala Harris, who is a good but boring middle of the road candidate. I would say similar things for our other candidates. I think Biden won just because things looked so bad with Trump and he was a reaction to Trump. I think he was a good candidate back in 2020, but not a great candidate. I feel like we haven't had a great candidate in a while, which is unfortunate. And I talked a little bit about how I think we need to get back to some of our roots and talk about things like single payer healthcare. Talk about things like, yes, women's right to choose is important, but it's not the only thing. There's a lot more things. We need to get back to talking about things that are good for regular, everyday Americans. That's the thing I've been saying over and over again. It's about regular, everyday Americans. Um, I think there's a perception out there that the Democrats are the party of the elite, and we are not. We should not be the party of the elite. For me, what I feel as a Democrat is that I want to help as many people in this country as possible, and that's what it should be about. So, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. I went to a Christmas party last night with some old friends. We have this, once a year around Christmas time. I used to spend a lot of time with them. I do not anymore. This is a long time ago, and I had not been back to see them in, I would guess, probably 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, in this sort of context. So I went there the other night, and I will tell you that all these people who I'm still close friends with, almost every one of them is a Trump supporter, and I'm fine with that. Like I've tried to make clear here, I am not anti-Trump. I'm not anti people who voted for Trump. I'm pro-America. I'm pro USA, as most of us should be. But anyhow, at this particular gathering, we did talk about politics a little bit, which I was happy to do. We had reasonable discussions about politics. And one of the points that I tried to make is what I think is the 800-pound gorilla at this point in the room. The 800-pound gorilla is wealth inequality in America. So today we're going to look at a video that has been shared. It's been on the internet. You might have seen it already, but I think it's important to watch again and get the full context. So why don't we move into that and see what this video from, I think it's from 12 years ago, had to say. And keep in mind that this is from 12 years ago that this video was made.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them
And this
what they
first one
thought was
is
the
what they
ideal
think.
distribution.
But the
And
top 20% own about 50%
that's at least
of the
9 out
wealth.
of 10 of them, said it should be more like this.
And here's what they thought it should
In other
be.
words, more equitable than they think it is.
So the
now
top
that fact is
20%
telling,
is
admittedly.
probably about a quarter
The notion
in that
that
other
most
chart.
Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality.
So yeah, he's going to get into the reality here, and the reality is nowhere close to this. And I'm going to emphasize again, this was 12 years ago when this video was made. I would imagine this has only gotten much, much worse, especially post-COVID the last 4 years or so. So let's hear what it says.
Compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind
And this is definitely the thing that I think is probably a lot worse even today. The top 1% and how much wealth they have in this country.
blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity.
I don't know if you were paying attention to some of those salaries that flashed by from 12 years ago. I don't think they're a whole lot better today. I think that's one of the things that is so obvious to regular people is how little our pay has changed over time. While the pay of the top 1% or top 10% has just been on a massive curve.
Here too. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally.
Yeah, that's socialism. That's that's not what we're after. Please don't freak out here and just keep watching.
We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But
And that's important too, because I think they're reasonable. Regular people are reasonable about something like this. It's not that we want total equality. We don't want that socialism they showed that first thing. And nobody wants that, I don't think. Well, sure, there are people that want that, but not in huge numbers. But we do understand that some people should be able to get a little bit more in this country, and we support that because we all hope that we're the people that will get a little bit more, and we can work hard enough to improve our lives and improve the lives of our children. And there's nothing wrong with that. And this distribution that we show, yeah, that's a good representation of what, most people feel it should be like. But it's about to get ugly.
let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality.
And I'd agree with this here. I don't think this is terrible either, if this is what it really was. If you could work hard and, come up with a brilliant idea or do something that nobody else is doing and get yourself up into that upper echelon of the wealthy, maybe you do deserve a share more like that. I could live with something like that. But again, this is not the reality.
Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans.
Now, he's going to talk about this in a minute. But if you look at the far right side of the screen now, you will notice that it goes off the chart. You can't even see the top when you're up in that top 10%. He'll get to it, though.
Don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich.
And look how much the middle class has suffered from what was the ideal distribution and then what they thought the distribution was. And that's part of the issue, I think, is that for a long time, so many people thought they were better off than they actually were. And I think we've learned over the last few years that some things are deteriorating and making it harder and harder. And I think Trump is a response to that. His election is partially a response to that. And I think we need to think about some different things. So let's keep going.
Between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them.
Now, I don't think I need to say a whole lot right here, right? 7%, the middle class on down, owns 7% of the total wealth in this country. Again, this was 12 years ago. I think this is much worse now. I wish I had some concrete numbers I could give you, but I don't. But I'm fairly positive, and I think you would agree that it's probably a lot worse now than it was then.
And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976 they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by.
And that's one of the things you hear. If you spend any time on YouTube looking for videos about how to be financially successful, how many of them are talking about investing and focusing on investing as the primary way to do that? Investing, whether that be real estate or stocks and bonds, things of that nature. That is the key. So many of these videos say. And 50% of the investment is owned by the top 1%. Like, why? Why? It's only good for those people? Like, I don't know. Has Jeff Bezos directly helped you with all his wealth? I don't think so. I don't see it.
I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
I'm going to go back a little bit here. I want to show the chart here where we had the three next to each other. Here we go. The ideal, then what we think it is, and the reality. Can you believe the differences in those charts? It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And that top 1%, they've got almost all of it.
That the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
So that's the reality. That's where we're at, and that was 12 years ago. I can't imagine what it is today. How much of the nation's wealth does Elon Musk have in his own bank account? How much does he own? And why? Isn't there a certain level where it doesn't matter how much more you have? There has to be, right? I just don't know. So that also got me thinking. If you wanted to make $1 billion, just $1 billion, how long do you think that would take you? Well, if you're making the federal minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, which we talked about in our last video, how egregiously low that is. It's good that it's higher in many states now, but at a federal level, this needs to change. 69,000 years to make $1 billion, making $7.25 an hour. 69,000 years. And if you made the median U.S. household income, let me see when that was from. I don't know. 19,231 years to earn $1 billion. And hey, they even have a little calculator down here, huh? Well, let's see. My first real job, I made $29,000 a year. After I got my degree from Northwestern University, a pretty good school, my first job was $29,000 per year. That would take me 34,000 years to get there. Let's just say I got up to 100,000. You get up to six figures. You're feeling pretty good at six figures, right? You would be. Even today, you feel pretty good about being at six figures, especially if you're not at six figures now. How long until you make $1 billion making six figures? 10,000 years. And that supposes that you don't spend a dime of that. Is that possible? God knows it's not. You have to buy eggs, milk, cars. You got to pay for a house at a 7% interest rate. And also you got to compete with corporate interests to buy that house at that 7% or 8% interest rate, whatever it's at right now. House prices out of control to go with it. Total insanity. So I played this video at that party last night that I talked about with all my old friends who are Trump supporters. Still love every one of them. So what was their reaction to that video? They understood it. As any normal person, I think, understands it when they see that it's out of control. But the question that was asked, which I think was really important, is, like, what do you really do about it? What can you really do about it? The problem is that the wealth inequality in this country feeds directly into our political system. I think one of the key reasons that we only have two choices in any election between Republicans and Democrats, they're both run by the top 1%. Ultimately, maybe it's different corporations that support each party in some ways, but they're both run by people with tons and tons of money whose only real interest is making sure they keep making money, right? That has to be true. And they dress things up. They try to say things are different than they are. But in the end, it's still about making money. And that's why they want there to be only two parties. You only have two choices, and they're both roughly the same in the end. Because they get to keep doing what they're doing to take as much money out of the economy as possible. Meanwhile, we're fighting for scraps, and we're fighting each other. That's the main problem. So what can you do? It's hard to say. There's no easy answer. I think some things you can try to do, try to support causes that maybe think about this and have answers to this. There's the Forward Party from Andrew Yang, if you remember him, who ran for president a few years ago. Look it up. The Forward Party. They believe in universal basic income, which is a way to distribute wealth a little bit differently. And I think we need to stop being afraid of talking about distributing wealth. We're not saying everybody gets the same exact thing and that's it. But do the top 1% need as much of that wealth as they have? Can't they already buy everything they want with half of what they have? Maybe less? I'm not saying we need to take away from middle class Americans to give it to poor Americans. Nobody says that. That's never what they're saying. And I'm not even saying that we just have to take away money to give it to other people. But that money needs to go where it can be more effective and not just sitting in the bank of a rich person going into their next super yacht purchase. Right? Isn't that logical? Doesn't that make sense? Nobody's actually talking about pure socialism here. They aren't. So look up the Forward Party. Look up things like ranked choice voting, which will make it that maybe third parties could actually get some footholds in elections, potentially. I'll probably do a video about ranked choice voting pretty soon to explain to you how it works. But in the simplest of terms, basically instead of choosing one candidate when you're voting, you rank the candidates. You say, this is my top choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. So you don't have to feel like you're spoiling your vote if you wanted to say vote for RFK in the last election. Let's say you want to vote for RFK, but if RFK didn't win, your vote will go to Trump. Let's just say that's what you want to do. You could do that with ranked choice voting, and it would affect the outcome of the election. RFK might have actually gotten a reasonable percentage that way because people wouldn't feel like, oh, I'm throwing away my vote doing this. Nobody should ever feel like they're throwing away their vote, but we should have choice, and we don't have choice right now. So we'll talk about ranked choice voting in the future. I'll get into more details about that. But just sit with this and think about it. Let me know what you think. How does this move you? How does this make you think about things? What can we do differently? What do you think we could do? It seems insurmountable. I remember I had an English professor, and he talked about the sublime. The name was Martin Lay. Martin Lay, if you're out there somewhere. But his description of the sublime is exactly how I feel about this. The way he described the sublime was standing on a beach with a massive 400-foot wave in front of you, and just knowing that there's nothing you can do about it. That's the feeling of the sublime. Like there's, okay, I'm here right now. Running will do me no good. Going left or right will do me no good. I'm ready to just accept what this is. And that's kind of how this feels when you think about that chart. Because how could regular people like you and me possibly have any impact on this when money buys so much power in this country? It really does. So think about that. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe if you want to. Hopefully we get some interest in this and start having some discussions. Thanks.